Okay, got a notification?
Sorry?
Do you have a notification that says Yuri's recording the call?
Yes, it is. It's on.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on this episode, this is our all things Haiti episode. We're going to be returning to the island of Haiti in Latin America, which like Native Americans has been the longest victim of global white supremacy, and yet the one with the longest resistance to it. So we're going to be talking all about Haiti. My guest for the evening is Jean Saint-Vil, who is a radio show host, a historian, a journalist, activist against the imperialism that's brutally inflicted on his country of Haiti, and of course he's a Pan-Africanist thinker. And before I get to my question, Jean, welcome to the program. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Youri. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you today.
Likewise. And just before I get to my question, yes, we both know mutual friend of ours, Eve Engler, the brilliant Canadian historian, anti-imperialist thinker, NGO critic, and activist. And a lot of times, when I go to online events, which is all about Haiti, there's often Eve, and then there's often you in the panel, and of course, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute has had you on several times, and past guest L. Jones, and hopefully I'll get Jemima Pierre on. So it's an honor to have you. It's a real honor to have you.
Excellent. Likewise.
So my first question I wanted to ask you is, before we talk about, the current affairs, in Haiti, we really can't talk about the 2004 coup, the latest Haitian leader Jean Moïse, who was who was a puppet of the West. We really can't talk about about any of that. Although people kind of fast forward to talking about that, when really, anytime we talk about Haiti, we have to talk about the history of Haiti, which is which again, it really is like the Native Americans, like the Puerto Ricans. It really is a story of one nation which is brutally exploited by global white supremacy, capitalism, whatever you want to call it. But it does go back to global white supremacy, which is colonialism and and all of that. So my first question I want to ask you is, talk to us about the first European white supremacy project, which was which was Haiti, and the person who the evil cracker that did that was Christopher Columbus. And talk about his reign of terror, which sets the tone of the seemingly never-ending marathon of pan-European North American subjugation of Haiti.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, thanks, Yuri. And I think I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to do this background because really it's important. One way to describe it is that the current population of Haiti is very different than what it was before this first criminal, Christopher Columbus, arrived on land in 1492. In fact, Haiti was the first place where Columbus and the Spaniards established a place to land. Okay, so they arrived in the Bahamas first, but on December 5th, 1492, they landed and established an establishment on the island. And the people they found there are an Arawak-speaking people. Sometimes they refer to them as Taínos, but I come to understand that actually it was one of those situations where the Europeans mispronounced the names of the people and confused which area they were referring to. So they were an Arawak-speaking people, a people that were present in all of the Caribbean islands all the way to Florida, in what today is known as the United States of North America. And so,
and were they very similar to what indigenous people in Turtle Island, both in your country of Canada and but also the United States and parts of Mexico would look like? Or
yes, I would think so. And their description was that these were copper-colored people, so people with long straight hair, and some of the features are a mix of European and American. And there are Arawak people who survived, not on the island of Haiti, but you will find communities of Arawak, sometimes referred to as Tainos, on the island of Boriken, which the Europeans rebaptized Puerto Rico. So some historians say there were upwards of 1.5 million of these people when Columbus arrived. And as I've just described, today you won't find anyone who looks like them on the island. Of course, with DNA having that ability to survive, you will find traces of Arawaks on parts of the island, but you will not find anyone who is a full-blood Arawak. They were decimated by the Europeans. Sometimes the Europeans, to try to hide or diminish the extent of the genocide that they've conducted, they blame these things on diseases. But in fact, the evidence is clear that they were enslaved. The Europeans wanted to steal the gold, and there was a lot of gold, but surface gold, because there was never any, major industrial exploitation of gold around that time. But the Europeans used violence on the first inhabitants, and very quickly, within a matter of 50 years, the population was very, very low. So much so that anthropologists and historians find very few evidence of interaction or survival of Arawak genes through Africans mixing with the first inhabitants. However, as the Arawaks were dying in high numbers, one of the Catholic priests, Bartolomeu de las Casas, who was part of the European expedition, proposed that the Europeans go and kidnap more Africans on the west coast of Africa to replace the Arawak population. And that's how Africans started arriving in the Americas, first on the island of Haiti around 1499. 1503, 1499, sometimes historians debate as to which date the first Africans were arriving. But with the Spanish, that's when the population started. And of course, during that period, the French, the Spanish, and the British started to be in competition with each other in terms of kidnapping Africans and bringing them in the Americas in general. But the island of Haiti became one of the most coveted places because the riches of the island were so much so that at different times, the island was carved between the French and the Spanish, and then the British. And the French, having occupied the island for the longest time, the Haitian Revolution, when it occurred by the uprising of the Africans, it was the French under Napoleon Bonaparte who were chased the last on the island. But all three European powers, the Spanish, the British, and the French, were defeated by the Africans. There's upwards of 55,000 British soldiers who died in Haiti. I mention this because sometimes it's forgotten because people focus on the French, but it needs to be understood that not only did the Africans have to fight all three European powers, major European powers of the time, but once they declared a free and independent nation, the first to abolish racial slavery, the Europeans, even when they were at war with each other in Europe, when it comes to attacking the Black nation of Haiti, they worked in tandem. And there are many examples of that throughout the history of Haiti. It's not, ancient history. An example, the reason, for instance, that today the island is separated into two republics. Okay, the Republic of Haiti
and the
and Dominican Republic.
Spanish speaking.
Yeah. So technically, the French having won a war against the Spanish, the whole island became French, okay, in the 1700s, Traité de Ryswick, I believe. And then when Haiti defeated the French, technically the whole island is for the Africans who defeated them. However, the Europeans, including the Americans at the time, conspired to limit the progression of the African liberators. And so they managed to maintain the city of Santo Domingo under the power of a French general whose name was Ferrand, who took it upon himself to re-enslave African children who were in the city of Santo Domingo and some of the cities around there. And when Dessalines went to liberate Santo Domingo in 1805, in the first year of existence of Haiti, it was the Americans who helped the British and the French and the Spanish to defeat, actually they didn't defeat him, but they tricked Dessalines into believing that there was a large French expedition attacking Port-au-Prince on the west, so that he left the siege of Santo Domingo in March of 1805 to go and protect the western side. And so that way, the white supremacist forces were able to maintain the eastern part with a white presence, which gradually they helped to actually take 2/3 of the island. And to this day, many Dominicans will tell you that they don't celebrate their independence from the Spanish, who were the enslavers of the native people on that side of the island, but they celebrate their independence from Haiti, the Africans who liberated the whole island. Because Dominican Republic side is a very strange thing. I mean, you have a set of people who are basically proud of white supremacy on the island. And it's very sad because Black Dominicans suffer a lot of racism in their own country because the model that they've established in Dominican Republic is what they wanted in Haiti. And when the Americans invaded Haiti with the Yankee troops in 1915, they actually instituted in Haiti exactly what you've had in Dominican Republic. And that's why there's always a lot of subliminal messages when you see, National Geographic or CNN doing shows and showing the contrast between Haiti and Dominican Republic. They don't come out and say it, but what they're really telling you is that, you see, where it is the whites who are ruling, they are better off. They have more trees on their side. But what they don't tell you is how Haiti became so impoverished. And even the forest of Haiti had to be cut down in order to generate revenue to pay a ransom to the French. And that ransom was collected not only by the French military, but also by the US military that occupied Haiti and took the money to US banks, transited to French banks. And we're talking about the equivalent today of $121 billion that the French collected from the Africans who liberated Haiti from 1825 to 1947. So, of course, when you look at Dominican Republic side on the east, 2/3 of the island that has a lot of flat land, so where they can do a lot of agriculture. And when you look at on the 1/3 that is occupied by the Africans who liberated Haiti, you will now see a contrast in terms of level of development. But if you don't look at the history of how it happened and when it happened, you will lose the real story. Because really, the Dominican Republic is successful white supremacy where whites rule a land that's inhabited by a majority Black people. But the rule of white supremacy is so entrenched that even those Africans are confused about who they are. So you will hear theories about Dominicans, and some of Dominican intellectuals develop those theories to say that they're not, if you see that they're not all white, it's because they were mixed with the first peoples, the Arawak and the Spanish. There's no African there.
This is this is where we get into the very thorny issue, which does exist in Latinx communities and even in our own Black communities of colorism. Then, right?
Absolutely.
That well,
Absolutely.
the colorism plus languageism, because I assume like Dominican Republic and probably other Spanish-speaking parts of Latin America and maybe even Brazil also has this. Probably discriminate against the Haitians, or have a knee-jerk rejection of the Haitians, because it's like, you French-speaking Black Africans, why don't y'all go back to Africa? Like is there some of that happens, like some of that kind of dynamic?
Absolutely. And actually, it actually exists within the countries, like even within Haiti. Because sometimes when people talk about the Haitian Revolution, and then, we romanticize the whole thing as if, all the Blacks were progressives and they fought against. No, I mean, there are a lot of sellouts, and white privilege was distributed under the colonial system by the drop. Okay, so the lighter you were, the more white privilege you had. And sometimes people don't realize that this whole thing, whether you're calling it colorism or whatever, it is all white supremacy. It's just a question of how much privilege they gave you based on how much European blood you had in you. And so Haiti does not escape that either. And it's prevalent in the whole of the Caribbean, because, of course, added to the colorism, then there's the class thing, and it's all about how much money you have. And so you will, I always use that example. So for instance, there's been a lot of anti-Haitian sentiments developed and cultivated in islands such as the Bahamas, because with the situation, socioeconomic situation and political situation being so difficult in Haiti, a lot of Haitians who are impoverished Haitians who are taking the boats to go to Florida, they end up in the Bahamas, and some of them stay there for generations. And so then, the elites in those countries develop these anti-Haitian sentiments, especially when there's going to be elections, to say that, they're going to be tough on immigration, and you look at the population and it's all the same population. If you were to do any DNA test, you would find that it's the same population. But people keep, and they people develop and cultivate a strange sense of national identity, even in the Caribbean, because we were severed from our African identity. And so you have a whole bunch of Africans who are discriminating against each other because they don't recognize each other as brothers and sisters anymore, because, language difference. So you have these Africans with names like Jackson, with Saint-Vil, like all of these European names that mean crap, really, in terms of describing who we really are. And so you would have kids playing, you can imagine kids playing on a beach and in fact, a friend of mine told me that he actually witnessed this actual scene in the Bahamas, where a kid is cursing another one, and he called the other kid a Haitian. And the other kid, counters, oh, well, if I'm a Haitian, you're an African. Both Africans, but they don't know who they are. of course.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow, that's
and you know,
unbelievable.
and as I say that, honestly, I must tell you that you could see the same scene in Haiti as well. Okay, where basically, you know, people think that calling someone African is a diss, okay, by the lack of knowledge of how we came to be and who's around us, and a sense of who our family, the African, global African family is. And so there's a lot of work to be done because the history is not known. You know, there are very few exchanges between Haiti and Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean. And it's not only a question of language. You know, the existence of CARICOM was supposed to help with that, but the elites have not done enough, in my opinion, to help us because, you know, a lot of the situations that we're facing right now in Haiti, other islands have also faced them. You know, when the Jamaicans were making efforts with their socialist movements in the 70s, etc., the Americans and the CIA crushed them, just like they crushed the movements in Haiti or in Grenada with Maurice Bishop. So, of course, you know, if we were to do our work and help people in the Caribbean better understand what our predicament is, being so far from Mother Africa and so close to the evil near Florida, we would, you know, find the need to show solidarity.
It is amazing. It is amazing though. I have to, you know, comment on this before I get to my second big question. But it is amazing how hatred of the other often unites people. Like Brexit, it was hatred for the other, which really got, like, you know, the left nationalists together with like the right wing nationalists to go, hey, EU, stop colonizing us, and hey, Commonwealth guys, you're now one of us, and we can discriminate against these Eastern European, like. It's just like amazing. In India, it's amazing how the hatred of the other gets, like, you know, the Sikh and the Hindus and whatever to discriminate against the Muslims. And then Latin America, which I think does a much better job at kind of, you know, uniting all of the, you know, oppressed people together. But it is still incredible how Latin America, if you're not speaking Spanish, if you're not speaking Brazilian, I mean, Portuguese, then you're not, then you're not really, you know, one of us. And then of course there is, you know, the racial caste system, which also plays a dynamic within each country itself, in which indigenous people are like the Dalits, they're the untouchables. If the darker you are, the more marginalized you're going to get. If you're biracial, yeah, you're probably not going to get too much flack. But then of course, then comes the issue of class. Well, are you middle class or are you working class? So it's just unbelievable.
You know, and that's the beauty of the Haitian Revolution, because in fact, the founder of Haiti, took steps to deal with this problem from the beginning. In the Haitian Constitution, the first constitution in 1805, Dessalines declared that all Haitians are from henceforth known by the generic term of blacks. And he did that, and in that same constitution declared that the German who were spared and saved during the revolution, the Polish, they are all Haitian and therefore black. Okay? And what he was actually targeting, and sometimes people think that, okay, this means that he was creating a black supremacist society. No, not at all. If that's what he was doing, he would not grant Haitian citizenship to the blue-eyed, blonde, Polish, and Germans who are still in Haiti. What he was saying is that this whole caste system that were created under the colonial rule, where they were calling people mulatto, a mulatto is half a human, because the white folks considered themselves the only human, and therefore, moitié mulatto is, like a mule is half of a horse. Okay, and they, yes, and they went as far as calling people quarteron. Quarteron is 3/4 of a human. Okay, so that means you have 3/4 whites and 1/4 African. And they divided people like that to, like, all kinds of degrees, especially in a place like Brazil. And all of these determinations come with privileges in terms of what kind of clothing you can wear, how many slaves you can own, etc. And so oftentimes when we talk about the racial enslavement system, we simplify to talk fast.
Yeah.
But what made it survive is that the colonial powers offered everybody an opportunity to participate in the crime. And that's why you had freed blacks who owned Africans as their slaves. And technically, a free black could actually own a mulatto and a quarteron. Of course, in the dynamic of the reality, this probably never even happened. Okay? The only rule you could not break is that no one could own a white person. So the sanctity of whiteness, okay, was what qualified the colonial system. And if you look at how many of the countries of Latin America continued to grow, they maintain that. And so when you talk about colorism in Latin America, yeah. So for instance, people talk about Simon Bolivar and Miranda before him having gone to Haiti and asked for help, and the Haitians provided ammunition, gave them soldiers, even their flags were created in Haiti. And the only demand of the Haitian leaders, starting with Dessalines, was that wherever they go and they liberate, they must automatically declare the end of racial slavery and liberate the enslaved human beings. They didn't do that. So Bolivar freed his own personal slaves, but they maintained the slavery system. And so whether it is in Venezuela or when they created the Greater Colombia, what they established, they call them free republics, but these were mulatto dictatorships. Okay, so the mixed race folks like Bolivar took power, but they maintained their African brothers and sisters in enslavement in some of these places up till, I think in Cuba it was in 1888, or Brazil, that they finally abolished racial slavery. And so,
be damned. And Simon Bolivar is supposed to be literally the best of the best, like the Pan-Latin Americanist who white folks would probably consider him a traitor to their race, since he was very much. Wow, and wow, that's fascinating.
The amazing thing is that there is redemption in all of that, because Bolivar, for instance, under pressure from the US, refused to receive Haitian delegates when they did the first meeting of the Americas in 1825. Now, Haiti gave all the help in order for them to liberate Latin America and create places like Venezuela, Colombia, etc. But then when they're doing the first meeting of the Americas, okay, Haiti could not go, because the Americans said, if you invite these blacks, we will cancel the meeting. And so they had the meeting in Panama without Haitians. Okay, but Hugo Chavez, much love and respect for him forever, took it upon himself to rectify the situation. And that's why he established, the Petro-Caribe Fund program, and insisted in going to Haiti and ask forgiveness of the Haitians for the betrayal of Haiti by Latin America. And Hugo was very, very proud of his African roots. He always spoke about his grandmother and all of that. And so there's a resurgence of Black African roots awareness in Latin America. And I've lived it. I've seen it in Venezuela. It's a very beautiful thing. It's something to be encouraged. In Brazil, it's happening also. In Mexico, it's happening in many places. But I believe that there's much more that we can do. So, for instance, in the reparations movement, I'm glad to see that more and more people now, when we talk about reparations, we don't only talk about, as an isolated thing. It's really reparations to the indigenous people of Africa and of the Americas. Because really, when you look at the genocide that happened in whether North or South America, it's the same type of attack that happened on the indigenous people of the African continent. And so we really need to, and President Maduro of Venezuela is one of the leaders who is really, embracing that. He's one of the first, actually the first Latin American leader who actually took it upon himself to establish a study group on reparations in Venezuela. And he's invited African folks from all over the planet, to
wow.
to do the work.
That's that's fascinating. In fact, one of the last questions I have to ask you is actually related to the Native American Holocaust of Turtle Island, your country of Canada and America. And there's a question I do want to ask about that and how we can unite, that movement with the global reparations of the African Holocaust, which includes, child slavery in the United States, slavery in Canada, as well as Haiti. But before we get into that, then I do have to ask, this question, which is, which is French colonialism. Now, France's grotesque treatment of Haiti. Now, isn't that a good window into knowing France's real role in the world? Because France's real role in the world, because back then France's empire was just as sick as the British Empire, the Belgian colonization of Congo. And so I want you to respond to that, but also I want you to respond to this, which is, why are most French people so ignorant of their country's dark colonial past, to the point where most think that France is a force for good in the world, and that France was actually quite benevolent towards their colonies? And then, of course, because Jacques Chirac didn't invade Iraq, everyone gives France a pass, even though France is even though France, we do know evil did not just start because of Sarkozy and Francois Hollande. We know that France, if you just look at Haiti alone, is a very good window into French history and French and ongoing French imperialism. So do respond to all of that.
Yeah, and honestly, sometimes I refrain from even separating French, British, Spanish, Belgian. I understand that there are differences. Dutch, German. It's a pattern. Australian. I mean, you go and you look at what happened in Australia or New Zealand. It's the same thing. It's white dominance, and that's the pandemic that we've experienced on the planet in the last 1,000 years. And chief among that, because we've mentioned the states here, but we haven't spoken about the church. Like I said, it was a Catholic priest who came with the idea that, listen, we want to steal the gold. The Arawak people are dying, or selfish of them. Let's go to Africa and kidnap some Africans so they can get the gold for us so we can take it to Europe. It never dawned on them that they could work the land themselves. So this behavior wasn't a Spanish behavior, because the same pattern that the same approaches that the Spanish had used, the French used, the British used, etc. And so when you look, for instance, at the documents, the French had a document called Le Code Noir, which was actually promulgated by Colbert. And Colbert is one of those French writers. For people who go and study literature, they would classify him among the great writers of the Enlightenment, okay, le siècle des Lumières. But all of these criminals were supporters of the racial enslavement system. And Colbert, he wrote the Black Code, and the Black Code said, you know, if an enslaved African woman becomes pregnant, the baby in the womb of that woman belongs not to the you know, the father or the mother, but to the white man who owns that woman. So basically, they own you from your mother's womb. And even the breast milk, okay, of the African woman, they stole. Okay, so this is the system. And often also, we neglect the role of white women during that period. It wasn't just a male thing. You know, the European family worked in tandem to establish white dominance wherever they went. And they used the church, they used the military, and they used the business. And that's why I usually refer to the 3 M's, okay? Military, merchants, and missionaries, okay? And they each have their role in the enterprise. So the French, of course, in Haiti committed a horrendous crime. I mean, just the numbers of people who were killed. There's a French writer named Claude Ribes, whom I've had the privilege of meeting in Paris, and he's written one of the books that I would recommend people to look at. It's called The Crime of Napoleon, Le Crime de Napoléon.
I'm looking forward to getting a copy of that, because again, it's amazing how this guy, you know, is lionized as if he's very much lionized. I think for secular leftists and secular liberals, they kind of see, you know, Napoleon as this sort of you know, Lenin before there was a Vladimir Lenin, and I don't want to get into, you know, all the controversies of, you know, communism and so forth. But he's literally, you know, lionized, and then I'm always waiting, you know, for somebody to say, you know, but didn't this guy commit like mass like crimes against humanity against like the non-white French people? And of course, when we talk about the French Revolution, just like when we talk about, you know, the American pseudo-revolution, when they say all men are created equal and egalitarian, you know, fraternity and so forth, it's only for the men. The women are completely like excluded from all of that. And
white men, the only white men were human, and basically that's the world that they created. And today, we're trying to fix some of the problems associated with, you know, those original crimes, but it's very difficult, as you can see with what we've seen with George Floyd, and you know, every week there's something happening that reminds us that white supremacy is the foundation of those so-called democracies when we talk about the United States, Canada, etc. So in the case of France, though, when you think about Napoleon, on Claude Ribes' book, the cover has a photograph, not you know, a drawing, a photograph of Adolf Hitler going to pay homage on the mausoleum of Napoleon Bonaparte, because Napoleon was the model for Hitler. And there's good reason for that. So for instance, when they talk about the gas chambers that were used by Hitler, well, he's not the first to have used that. Okay, the first person to have used that is Napoleon Bonaparte in Haiti, where they used the boats, and they used oxide d'hydrogène to asphyxiate the Africans in the boats. chemical warfare. Okay.
Whoa.
So, yeah, and the atrocities, and of course, some people know about the fact that Napoleon sent dogs to be trained in Cuba, starved and trained to eat African flesh. And the general who was in charge of that expedition, his name was Donatien Rochambeau. And you would go to the US, you'd go to France, and you'd find statues of Donatien Rochambeau to this day. Now, this man was so brutal in terms of the way they assassinated large populations of Africans, women, children, men, soldiers, non-soldiers, civilians, butchered like large populations of Africans. And it became such a horrific scene that they gave examples where in one battle in the city of Petit Goave, where the dogs got confused. They got, like, the scene was so horrific around them, the dog went back to eat the Europeans who were wounded. Because the dogs are not racist, contrary to the Europeans. So the dogs were attacking the Europeans, and then they started to stop using them because it was useless. The dogs were not as wicked as they wished them to be. But all of these things were not done by Adolf Hitler. They were done by the hero of the French nation, Napoleon Bonaparte. But there's nothing. I mean, this didn't stop. You have heritage from the Congo, and Leopold, who were cutting the hands of Africans. You don't hear people talk about Leopold in any great length when they're talking about genocide.
Yes, I interviewed a Belgian left-leaning journalist and peace activist and proper anti-imperialist, and because I was always quite surprised. You would hear from lots of people that, like, oh, we never learned about Leopold II and so forth. And then when I asked him, because of a slightly older generation, and he was like, oh no, we did not learn about Leopold II. And I said to him, I find that quite strange because Mark Twain. Who I don't like, who was quite racist about Native Americans, but he was like the first anti-imperialist of his time, and one of his big and yeah, I mean he campaigns against Leopold II, and it's so it's amazing how that gets buried. But that's a good window though into doesn't kind of like European propaganda about its own bloody atrocity. So France, for example, I remember talking with an aunt of mine, her brother, based in Paris. He's but they're originally from Guadeloupe, and we were talking about French institutional racism towards mostly Muslims, North Africans, but even blacks who live in what they call the banlieues, the ghettos and stuff like that. And then so we were talking about that, and he was saying to me that this is how propaganda works, like in France. France depicts themselves as if we're so tolerant, we're so nice to our immigrants. We only don't like the immigrants who don't want to who don't want to integrate with us. And then he says you will turn on French television and it'll show you documentaries after documentaries about the Black Power struggle in America, but you'll never ever watch documentaries about French colonialism. Maybe one or two of of France doing something seedy in Africa, Congo, Rwanda, or whatever. But you'll never, you'll never have the kind of conversation that we're actually even having right now about Haiti. Is that how it works? In France, when you go visit, when you go to visit there and talk with the diaspora.
Yes, and it doesn't concern only history. I lived this in 2012. So having followed very closely how the white supremacist powers conducted the coup in Haiti in 2004, because we had a progressive government uh, that was thinking and actually not just thinking, but actually investing in healthcare, in education, I mean, the basic necessities of the population. And they overthrew that government. And I followed how that was being prepared from the early 2000 years to the conduct of the coup on February 29, 2004. So in 2012, while I was in Paris for work, I turned on the TV and, you know, France 24, Chaîne 2, like all of them, you just change the channels and they all telling the same story. And the story was that the French went to Ivory Coast to help the Ivory Coast population that were rebelling against a dictator. And the dictator is very brutal. They are killing indiscriminately. But on the French side, they're working with Ouattara, who is very careful. They're choosing their targets to make sure that they don't hit any civilians. And they're explaining that. And, you know, you have an embedded French journalist who is with the Ouattara troops, and he's giving interviews to them, how these guys are so concerned about, you know, the lives of civilians. And you know that the average French citizen is just swallowing that as if it was true. But the reason why I was sensitized to that,
but also black, but also the black, diaspora. Because if you were to talk with my mom about what France is doing in Mali, I can guarantee you she'll say France is being a force for good in the world. They're fighting against crazy Muslims, and not like no. France doesn't. But that's also because France is depicted like the French, like in history, they are depicted as being benevolent towards their colonial subjects, not like the awful British or the awful, Spanish and so forth like that. And I think it's the same thing, which I think is why people are, which I think is why people have just bizarre views on on France's real role in the world, where they say France is a force for good in the world. Look, they did invade, they did invade Iraq, and they're always they're always trying to be the good neutral actor in African affairs, unlike those evil Americans and stuff like that. And then if people do criticize it, they'll say, yes, Sarkozy, he was an outlier. Like, evil only started with Sarkozy and Francois Hollande.
Isolate him as the bad guy. Yeah, no, but it's a general thing. This is exactly the theme that is played in Canada. Okay, that Canada is not as brutal as the United States. In fact, Canada is always there for peacekeeping and whatever. But in reality, when you look into the details, it's just a division of labor, good cop, bad cop, and it's not new. So when Haiti was created, January 1st, 1804, in 1805, you get the French foreign minister, Prince Charles Talleyrand, who wrote to James Madison, who was then Secretary of State. He was to later become President of the United States. And his sentence is very telling. Okay, so here's the French foreign minister writing to his counterpart in the US, and he said, the existence of a Negro people in arms is a terrible threat for all white nations. So the white nation identity is very clear for these people. And the response from the United States, James Madison and the US government at the time with Jefferson, was to impose an embargo on Haiti. Okay, now imagine you have an island, okay, that became very prosperous on the fact that they were, cultivating sugar, cocoa, and agriculture. And you have to do commerce in order for this to be profitable for the population. Well, Haiti is surrounded by Jamaica. okay, British slave colony, uh, Puerto Rico, Spanish slave colony, Cuba, Spanish slave colony. Okay, so all around Haiti is enslavers, and you cannot sell any product. Like the Americans impose an embargo. So what do you think the Africans do? They just carve the land into small plots and they do subsistence farming, which is what you have in Haiti to this day. Okay, and now they tell you when these pseudo historians are writing books that, well, under the French, Haiti was prosperous. Once the Africans took over, it became poor. Well, is that really a mystery?
In fact, I'm pretty I'm pretty sure you probably get this, this casual racism that people just sprout out. That's how people depict what happened in South Africa. Is that, yeah,
Exactly.
apartheid was bad, but you know what? South Africa is really a basket case because you black people are just like not educated and just don't know how to run
Mhm.
your own affairs. And then it's like, well, I don't know. Check out this documentary of John Pilger or read this chapter of Naomi Klein's book, The John Doctrine, and then get that racist head out of your
Yeah, well, honestly, sometimes I
study,
feel like I don't feel to have so much patience. It's like, turn on your brain. Okay. So if you have millions of people working for you as slaves, yeah, you'd be rich. Okay. So the French were doing literature because they didn't have to cook food. Okay. The Africans were cooking the food. That's why these fools had, how people say, in order to have like table etiquette. That's one of the things that once I become a very professional person who's traveling and eating at these tables, I always laugh at these people. You sit and, there are three knives, forks, etc. The only reason they invented all this stuff is like these fools were not doing the dishes. Okay. So of course you can afford to have, 10 forks and spoons and
Yeah.
stuff. And whenever I'm at these dinners, that's always what's in my mind. I'm saying like, listen, I don't care which spoon I'm supposed to use first. I'm just gonna eat food. Okay. If you don't like
Exactly.
it, well, I'll go eat with my people instead. I mean, because the history of those things came from that period of time where white people were just sitting there living lavish lives and everything was being taken care for them. And that's why, because, that's a very serious thing. I'm joking about it, but that's the period of the Industrial Revolution. That's when scientists were making all kinds of discoveries. And of course, these discoveries benefited Europe and white North America. And every now and again, you would have, an African who managed to force themselves into inventing something in medicine and whatever. They lose all the credit because some white person steal it from them. Okay. But you have to understand the environment under which these things were happening. And so, of course, it's no miracle or this whole idea that the Anglo-Saxon worked hard. You didn't work hard, man. You had slaves. Okay. So, I'd be rich too if I had slaves. So, let's just not get stupid about that. So, when we think about uh, the spirit of the Haitian Revolution and what it created. Imagine Jesus, even in the Bible, did not stand against slavery. There is no text in the Bible that criticizes, let alone, admonish against slavery. Actually, the contrary.
I did not know that. That's it. That's interesting. There is slavery in the Bible, but I did not know that actually. Anyway, continue with what you were saying.
No,
Yeah.
it actually condones and encourages slavery. So if you go in Leviticus 25, verse 42 to 46, it tells you that you should not make the children of Israel from the same nation as you slaves. And when you need slaves, you will take them male and female from the nations that surround you, and they will be your slaves, and their children shall be your slaves for eternity. Okay?
And that's how, and that's how not just the French Catholic Church, but of course the Spanish Catholic Church and whatnot justified the dispossession, genocide, and there's lots of genocide in the Bible. Moses commits lots of genocide in the Bible.
Exactly.
But then, but yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say that the fact is, I know some of our people use religion in order to fight racial slavery. So they went and looked for some other verses of the Bible saying that love your brother like yourself, etc. But the very truth is the text is ethnocentric. And in fact, the God that was invented by the Romans, okay, is a God of conquerors and white conquerors. And that's why it was so easy for the Europeans to use Christianity, okay, as a vehicle of the colonial enterprise. And in fact, over time, many Africans got to accept the idea that it was a divine decision that they should serve the Europeans. And there are texts to that matter. Some people are familiar with the Black Bible or the Slave Bible, but it's much more than that. And it's very profound because even in places like Haiti, where you had a revolution that was, clearly anti-slavery, abolitionist in nature, you still have people who will question whether it was the good thing to revolt against racial slavery. And people will even suggest that to this day, they'll come up with sentences like Wilberforce used to say that do not free the Africans, you must first train them for freedom. Okay, and Wilberforce, who is heralded as an abolitionist, he was no abolitionist. These guys were pragmatic. Okay, these guys, what they were saying is that, okay, before the slaves revolt and slaughter us, let's organize an emancipation process that will take as long as needed as possible so that the whites come up on top no matter what. It's what they did.
Wow, Heights. Wow. The more one digs into Heights, the more one really digs into just how evil white supremacy is, and how they always manage to take evil to a whole nother level. But then going back to France. So France, it does all this brutal colonization of Haiti, and then Haiti, their freedom is paid with a heavy price because yes, they got rid of the slaveholders, but basically that global economic system of white supremacy, and that basically they were punished for their freedom, just like the way Cuba's revolution. Cuba is still paying the price of that freedom because yes, they freed themselves, but the whole system of capitalism with a little bit of a human face, Cuba still has to live under that, and is still being punished for that. So then France, colonialism has to evolve in many ways. So France's role in Haiti is also supporting the Duvalier dictatorships. So talk briefly about that and how brutal the Duvalier dictatorships were, and then the rise of Jean Bertrand Aristide, who was part of the liberation theology. Oscar Romero, God rest his soul, was also part of that. So yeah, talk about all of that. Explain to our audience all of that.
So again, if you look at the whole of the 20th century, Haiti suffered what they call gunboat diplomacy. And in a given month, you could have the French show up to collect the ransom, because they demanded it in 1825, but at various times they came back with boats to demand payment. And when a president of Haiti says that we don't have the money, we cannot pay, they, put their cannons to the
pay
national
for the
palace.
pay for the fact that's because basically, yes, Haiti freed themselves, but their punishment was that, well, you've just made us lose all of our profits and stuff like that, so you have to compensate for our loss of property, which was
Exactly.
enslaving you. And so yeah, that's
And
what
that
you're saying.
started in 1825. So, of course, the New York Times did a piece last May called The Ransom to talk about that collection that was made from 1825 to 1947. But again, it's important to underline that the French did not collect that money alone. They got help from the United States. Because when the United States invaded Haiti in 1915, then it was the US that was collecting all of the products that come out of Haiti in terms of agriculture, even the few forests that we had, to generate revenue to send to the French bank. And French families, and again, that's a shortcut when we say French families, because there are families of the British royal family, okay, people from the British royal family, cousins of the current Queen of England, who were part of the people who were collecting the ransom collected from Black Africans in Haiti.
Wow.
Okay, and some of that money was being paid as recently as 2005. Okay, so it's not ancient history. Okay, so essentially, Haiti's breast milk was being stolen from it. Okay, and like I said, the American cousins, white cousins of the French, were helping them. And it's just like, for instance, the expedition that Napoleon Bonaparte sent to Haiti to reinstate slavery in 1802. They got help from the Dutch and from other European powers. Okay, so it is always a white gang that operates in tandem, and it's not different today. You talked about Iraq, okay, and they go to the United Nations and do all kinds of charades, but in reality, the white gang will attack you, okay, if like Gaddafi was trying to establish money based on African gold, and the Americans and Europeans, wanting to protect the dollar and the euro, basically killed them. And the white gang was mobilized, and they will use any kind of excuse to justify their crimes. So when we talk about the ostracization of Haiti during that period of time, we really need to look beyond the French, because, like I said, at a given time, the U.S. invades and take control of the country, and still they are collaborating with the French. And one of the things that the U.S. wanted to do when they invaded in 1915 was to diminish the influence of the Germans, who, like I said, Dessalines allowed them to stay on the island, to take Haitian citizenship, and they were flourishing. But the Americans wanted to displace the German because at the time they had conflicts with Germany. And so what they did is that they went and got people from the Middle East, what they call the Middle East, essentially from Palestine, some of them Jewish, some of them from Syria, and they managed, because they had control of the island. They had invaded, in fact, during the same period, both the Dominican Republic side and the Haitian side, and they established a new group of people from the early 1900s who were displacing the mulatto elite in Haiti and taking over commerce and displacing the Germans. Okay? And so that's what now, when people in Haiti talk about the Siwo Libanais, but it's a shortcut, and it's really awkward because some of these people are neither Syrian nor Lebanese. Like I said, some of them actually Israelis. Like the richest man, supposedly the richest man on the island in Haiti today, his name is Gilbert Bidjot. He has nothing to do with either Africa or he's of Jewish extraction. He's the richest guy on the island right now. And these guys, they have private ports that the IMF and the World Bank and the United States impose Haitian governments to accept. And it's on those private ports that weapons are coming from the United States to conduct coups and to facilitate the gangs that have taken over large parts of the territory right now. Because every time we had progressive governments in Haiti, whether it is Lucius Salomon.
So Aristide wasn't the so when he was overthrown in '94 and he was overthrown in 2004, which we're going to get into. So he was not. So it's wrong when people say he was the first democratically elected leader of Haiti to have been overthrown in a Western-backed coup.
Well, the word democracy is, I don't know. I mean, was the U.S. a democracy when they created themselves and they had slaves? Right? I mean, can you be a democracy and have a billion slaves?
Settler colonialism, with Jim Crow thrown in there afterwards.
Yeah. So I prefer to talk about progressive leaders. And so when I say, for instance, Lucius Salomon, who was a highly educated person who became president of Haiti, at the time when he returned to the island, you needed, at a given time, 1,000 Haitian gourd, which is the local currency, to make $1. Within a span of 20 years, this guy practiced so much discipline and to organize Haiti's finances that in 1887, under his rule, when he became president, a few years after he became president, you needed one Haitian dollar for $1. Okay? And when you look what happened during the time that he was leading Haiti, what characterizes it is gunboat diplomacy. Okay? And under his rule, the British at a given time showed up with their guns and they said they're going to take over the island of Tortuga, Ile de la Tortue, unless he pays $1 million in reparations to some British lady who said that she was dispossessed by hooligans or hoodlums, on the island. And a few months later, the Spanish show up and they say the same thing: give them $1 million or else. And so, if you look at a specific year, 1883, there were social unrest on the island, and you had diplomatic representatives of countries like Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the U.S.
Demanding that they get a piece of their Haitian pie.
They get reparations, or they're gonna blow up the National Palace with the president. And so every time we had a progressive leader, that's what happened. So in the 40s, we had a very good brother named Dumarcet Estimé. And it's during that period of time that a lot of African Americans, the people in Hollywood, black and white, were entering Haiti, discovering, that there's a vibrant art scene there. Filmmakers started to go to Haiti, and there was a kind of a renaissance in Haiti. The U.S. got rid of him, first through harassment and then eventually with a coup d'etat. And so when Duvalier took over in 1957,
Papa talking later,
yeah.
Baby talk, yeah.
Yeah, so people need to look at that very carefully, because that's 2 years before the Cuban Revolution was successful. Okay, and you look at the 30 years of Duvalier, rule, and you look at the equivalent period of years in Cuba, and you compare what was happening in Haiti socioeconomically for the population and what was happening in Cuba, and it's day and night. Okay? Because the Americans basically gave all of their military support to Duvalier so that Duvalier could serve as their boy in the Caribbean to stop the spread of communism, okay, while they were attacking Cuba in every way possible. And in fact, some people don't know that the Americans used the services of Duvalier to expel Cuba from the OAS. So the
Wow.
deciding vote at the OAS to get Cuba out of the OAS was cast by Duvalier. And as compensation, the US would track anyone who was trying to overthrow Duvalier as early as in Florida. They would never even make it to the island. And if they make to the island, it's the CIA that gave information to Duvalier so that he would assassinate anyone who would challenge his dictatorship. So, you know, people talk about Duvalier.
So Papa Doc, was he did he just die in office and later his son took over, or was he briefly sort of?
So it's a very strange thing. Duvalier died in 1971. Okay, so he took office by a coup. No, not a coup. There was some kind of an election, you know, coordinated by the Americans, and he was named president. And then in 1964, his mandate was supposed to be over, and that's when Kennedy died. You know, I believe Kennedy died in 68 or
No,
63.
63. Robert F. Kennedy was murdered in
Right.
68, but yeah, JFK, who also
JFK
was
is 63.
who also was an imperialist scumbag. He typed in 64, 63,
Because there was some tension between Duvalier and Kennedy. So when Kennedy died, Duvalier felt like, okay, now I can work with Johnson, and Johnson will give me whatever I need. Okay. And so he declared himself president for life and promised the Americans that as long as he is alive, there will be no spread of communism in the area. And so Haiti essentially became, you know, an extension of the United States in the Caribbean, and the Americans could do whatever they wish. Okay. And in return, okay, the administration in the US, whether it is Republican or Democrat, it made no difference. They supported the Duvalier dictatorship. And that's not just in terms of money. The famous Tonton Macoutes, which are the henchmen, like the paramilitary groups.
This basically this is basically like a right-wing death squad, right?
Death squads, exactly. That they had no salaries. Their salary was the weapon that was given to them, and then, you know, they have to use that weapon to go and find whatever they need. Okay, ransom people, kill people, do whatever. Okay, and it's the United States that trained them. The creation of the VSN, or the Tonton Macoute Corps, was not only supported, but actually created by the CIA. And it's not me saying it, it's former CIA operatives who admit that. You know, if you go on YouTube and you do a search on the Tonton Macoute and CIA, you will find that information. And the idea was that during the period of Duvalier, U.S. business, which mostly we're talking about baseballs. At the time, 95% of the baseballs used in the world were manufactured in Haiti. But what they don't tell you is that this was slave labor.
The cheapest of cheap labor. When we want to talk about like awful, you know, sweatshops, I mean, all sweatshops are awful, but Haiti is the worst because of
Haiti was established as the control. Okay, so Haiti is the lowest level, and so if workers in Honduras or in Mexico, or anywhere else in Guatemala, are complaining, the threat is that, okay, we're going to close shop and we're going to go to Haiti. Okay? And that's how they control the workers in Latin America. Yes, cheapest labor. And of course, there's also clothing, electronics assembly. And Duvalier basically gave the American companies free rein, and he guaranteed them that as long as he's in power, there will not be any labor organizations that are going to threaten their cheap labor, their access to cheap labor, and all of that. And there was no union organizing under Duvalier. And so when in 1971 Duvalier's health was degrading, he chose his 19-year-old son, stupid as a rock. Like, this dude, even in high school, it was an embarrassment for his family, okay? They named him president, okay? And it's the Americans who organized that transition so that nothing could threaten the regime, okay? And so Jean-Claude Duvalier stayed in power all the way till 1986. And when the liberation movement, with some of the priests in Latin America who,
and
like
Aristide
Leonardo
was part of
Bob,
that. So Aristide, he literally was part of frontline people power movements, and he was, as I mentioned before, a liberation theologist, which were basically Catholic priests that actually read the Beatitudes and actually, were on the side of, on the side of the people that they're supposed to be representing in the Bible. Blessed are the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers. Unlike Vatican City, in which they basically represent Opus Dei, they basically represent, fascists and and stuff like that, right?
The film Romero, around the life of Bishop Oscar Romero, bless his soul, really explains exactly how this was happening in Latin America. I mean, essentially, you had people who grew up,
and that's the film with the Puerto Rican actor Raul Julia, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Great film, yeah, great film, very, very good film.
And he portrays Romero with a lot of brilliance. And I was lucky that at the time I was in 1991 ending my studies at the University of Waterloo, where I studied in biology. And then I started to take some electives, like you think these are easy courses like in the humanities, right? So yeah. I took a liberation theology course in my final year. And that was the most important decision I've ever made. Because while I was taking that course, for the first time, a liberation theologian was about to become the president of Haiti. And so when, I'm studying Leonardo Boff, studying Oscar Romero, and in my native country, Jean-Bertrand Aristide was to become president. And he was still a priest at the time. And of course, people who follow Latin America are not confused about this, because essentially you had two churches. You had the big church, and in Haiti, that's how we called it. We had the big church, and that big church is the cardinals, the bishops, the official church, and they're involved in every coup d'état. They're always on the side of the powerful, the dictatorship, etc. And then you have these young priests.
They do the dirty work of the Vatican Empire, who are just extension of the white supremacy system, and basically, and we're not going to get into this today, but NGOs. When I had Yves Engler on for the very first time, interviewing him on behalf of Black Agenda Report, NGOs are basically basically secular versions of what the missionaries are, right?
Exactly.
Charities, private charities that exploit the people.
It's the three M's, okay? Like the imperial system never operates without one of the M's: the military, the merchants, the missionaries. And so, you know, you look at any coup in Latin America, okay? The assassination of Salvador Allende in Chile, the church was involved. Like when they are planning a coup in Haiti against Jean-Bertrand Aristide twice, there are meetings that take place at the Catholic nuncio. And I believe even to this day, they are the oldest person in within the diplomatic corps, and so that's where the meetings take place to plot a coup. And so, as happened in Nicaragua and in other places, it also happened in Haiti. And so, the church had what they call the Tile. So there's the big church and there's the little church. And Aristide was part of the little church. So these are the priests who go to the mountainside, working with the peasants. And these guys are not reading them the Gospels of Paul, who is telling you that every authority comes from God, but rather they like John 2, verse 15 in the Bible that describes Jesus who enters the temple and find that, you know, all of the priests are robbing the widows, and he, you know, makes how do you call that, a whip.
Yes.
And start beating them, you know. So
and probably also saying things where, I mean, Jesus. I mean, what was the one thing that Jesus says that's the thing about the eye of the needle, that basically, like, I'm paraphrasing, but that basically he says it's kind of next to impossible for a rich person to have.
Yes, the elephant and the eye of a needle. Yeah. So, you know, this gospel, you know, I didn't live it because I was in Canada, but friends of mine who have nothing to do with church used to go to church every Sunday to listen to Jean-Bertrand Aristide on the pulpit. So obviously this guy was not, you know, preaching about turning the other cheek. He was telling people that their lives are as important as the so-called rich and powerful people. And the key sentence of Aristide's ministry, and to this day becomes the cornerstone of the movement, is tout moun c'est moun. And in Haitian Creole, when you say moun, it's the equivalent of the African word Ubuntu. And in fact, it comes from that. Moun is actually an African word.
That's that people are people through other people, something like that, right?
Exactly. I am because you are and we are. Okay. And that my happiness comes from
compassion and
exactly. And so when Jean-Bertrand Aristide, you know, reestablished the idea that the Haitian Revolution was established on the fact that we are all equal, and there is no if, buts, and anything about it, and therefore the resources of the island need to be shared equitably among all of us. And so, of course, this was unacceptable to the oligarchs, unacceptable to the Americans who had, you know, essentially slave labor. And so when Aristide actually was elected, and that's important to specify that, okay? Because oftentimes when people are
in
talking
the early
about
90s, yeah, this is in the early 90s then.
So the election was December 16th, 1990, and Aristide was to take office February 7th, 1991. Now, when people talk about U.S. animosity towards Haiti, we tend to use caricature, you know? So, for instance, people go to the fact that Donald Trump
calls Haiti a shithole country, yeah.
Yeah, along with the Congo and other African countries. So the fact is, that's caricature. I mean, if Donald Trump was all we had to worry about, we wouldn't have any problem, honestly. Yeah, you could just ignore Donald, okay? The problem is, it's more entrenched than that. It doesn't matter who is in the White House. It even doesn't matter whether it is a black president or, a so-called black or a so-called white president in the White House, Democrat, Republican. The policy of the United States towards Haiti is stable. Okay, so as soon as Jean-Bertrand Aristide became president, in fact, the election results were not even out yet. Jimmy Carter, good old Jimmy Carter, who, heritage, who goes around building houses for the poor around the world. Well, that's Jimmy Carter.
And monitors people election, although he is right that the Venezuelan elections are the most democratic in the world. But yes, that yes. Jimmy Carter.
Okay, exactly. With all of this positive credentials. Well, he went to Haiti in December 1990, and guess what his mission was? Okay, he went to see Jean-Bertrand Aristide and tell him, listen, we know you won the election. And he won the election by a landslide, okay? Because Haitians were so hungry for democracy. It was just like those elections in 1994 in South Africa. You didn't need to do any calculations to know who won. Yeah. Okay, because the people just came out and they said, we want this guy. So, at the end, they said that he won by 67% of the vote. I don't even think it was that close. Okay, he won by a landslide. And Jimmy Carter went to Jean-Bertrand Aristide before the results were released. And he begged him to go to the microphone and tell to the people that he concedes victory to the other guy, Marc Bazin, who was the chosen of the Americans, a former World Bank official, and like their boy. Jean-Bertrand Aristide said to Jimmy Carter, okay, if that's what you want to do, here's the microphone, you tell that to the people. And that essentially ended the story. Now, Jimmy Carter never came out to deny this, and how we know this happened is by the voice of a beautiful human being, one of the most beautiful people that I've had the privilege of meeting. His name was Antoine Ismeri. And as perhaps you might decipher from the name, he was not an African, he was a Palestinian Haitian. And there were two brothers, Georges and Antoine Ismeri. And Antoine Ismeri was very close to Aristide. It is said that he actually financed Aristide's campaign because, a priest from the church, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, did not even own a house, apparently. And so, a lot of the things that he needed in order to register as a candidate came from the support he got from the Ismeri brothers, and of course others in the Haitian population who supported him. But that's a significant thing, because remember I told you that in order to displace the Germans' influence, the Americans went to the Middle East and courted folks from Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and brought them in and gave them all kinds of privileges and created a caste.
Yeah.
And a new bourgeoisie in Haiti.
Yeah.
From these guys by giving them monopoly on the import, export of specific goods. And, so the families had access to specific products. So the folks who import rice don't get in the way of those who are importing sugar after basically the Americans destroyed the native Haitian sugar production. And so the Ismeri were an odd set of brothers because, these guys were supporting the popular revolution and the Lavalas movement. And so he's the one.
And Lavalas was the political party of Aristide, or at least it was the movement that more or less supported him.
Exactly. And so, when Ismeri broke news that Jimmy Carter was coming to Haiti to try to steal the election, the victory of the people. And there were news in some U.S. outlets who talked about that. Ismaili is a firebrand, and he's making all kinds of accusations, right, left, and center, and that he should not be taken seriously. But Ismaili had the merit of telling the Americans, listen, you're not going to do this here. We Haitians are going to decide the fate of our nation. Now, of course. That was a very short-lived victory on the part of the Haitians. In other words, we managed for the first time in recent history, after 30 years of US-backed Duvalier dictatorship, the Haitian population chose their own leader, and they chose a liberation theologian as their president. Euphoria in Haiti. I was among millions of Haitians who left the United States, Canada, Europe, Africa, the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, to go back to Haiti. We believed that everything was possible. We were rebuilding or building, not rebuilding, building the infrastructure of our country that was never possible before. It lasted 7 months.
But then unfortunately, as always, the Americans, the French, and their other partners in crimes, they use economic warfare. They find people to sabotage. There's always some douchebag black misleadership class member, whether it's in Haiti, whether it's in any part of Africa, even the Caribbeans, that are ready to, sell their people out. The NGOs also play a big, also play a big role in that. But Aristide has his comeback. So he's overthrown. He's later allowed back to the country. Then things get the Americans managed to get their their black leadership class members into office, but then Aristide has a huge political comeback. And then that leads us to 2004. But of course Aristide, he gets reelected, by popular mandate, tries to implement very modest reforms, even giving people just a wage, an actual wage. But then he's overthrown in that 2004 coup, color revolution, whatever you want to call it. George W. Bush is the president. Paul Martin of the Liberal Party of Canada was the prime minister. But what I wanted to ask you though about that, because I talked about that with Eve, although the bloody details of the coup and the reign of terror that took place afterwards, by these by these basically neo-Duvaliers, what were they called, the Tonton
Makut.
Yeah, them. So a reign of terror is unleashed after after Aristide is again overthrown. And I'm gonna post the links to the documentary Haiti Betrayed, which people should pay to watch, and also the link to We Must Kill the Bandits, which is definitely a must see. So that'll give people all the gory details, which we're not going to get into because of time. I have to ask this question, because this is what really gets under my skin when you really look into Haitian histories, and you talk with people like Richard Sanders, Eve Engler, or yourself. And that's this question, which is, why do you think, in general, Haiti doesn't get the strong solidarity or mass mobilization against Western imperialism that Vietnam got, Iraq got during the second invasion, even Yemen and Palestine gets much more solidarity, when the imperialists, unleashed their reign of terror? Why, when Iraq got millions of people globally across the world, including, we've been talking about France and yours truly, Canada, people protesting before the invasion even happened, where was the peace movement and the anti-imperialist movement when they came to this 2004 coup against Aristide by, that stupid, fake cowboy George W. Bush and Paul Martin? Where was that? Where was that solidarity and mass mobilization? Because, to quote Bob Dylan, the silence was too deafening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very important question. And I think, one important book that I would recommend people look at is Peter Hallward's book, Damming the Flood, okay, which talks about how the NGOs, especially the left ones, were corrupted. And of course, you mentioned Richard Sanders' book, publications in Coat of Arms, Coalition Against, and Evangelist books as well. Now, it's, I think, because the imperialists learned their lessons well. Of course, yes, there was support for Vietnam War resistance, but it was gradual. People learned about what happened. In the case of Haiti, the media that was telling folks about what was happening in Haiti played on very easy racist stereotypes. Okay? If you cast what's happening in Haiti as a messy war against all bad guys, then therefore it becomes easy for the so-called leftist progressive in North America to say, well, Canada, the United States, Europe had to choose because there are no good guys there. They're all bad guys. And that's why they focused a lot.
So in other words, the NGOs definitely played a major role in smearing Aristide as, once upon a time he was this wonderful person, and then he gets into power and doesn't know how to act in power, and he becomes corrupt and stuff like that. So, they did the same with Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez is a nice democratic socialist lecturer, and later he becomes a communist dictator. They've done the same thing with Nicolas Maduro. So basically, they did that with Aristide on steroids then.
And the only difference in the case of Venezuela is that Venezuela had an infrastructure, the military, where you had, and God bless him, Hugo Chavez, because he came from there.
Yeah.
And you have, they managed to rescue the Venezuelan military from the School of the Americas and the U.S. corruption and all of that. And so, although you do have corrupt military within the Venezuelan military, but you have enough good soldiers that they neutralize the impact of U.S. infiltration in their country. In the case of Haiti, unfortunately, we never had a chance, because Jean-Bertrand Aristide was elected in 1990, and it's you could call it bad luck. I don't believe in luck, but it so happens that the former director of the CIA, H.W. Bush, was president of the United States when Aristide was president. He was re-elected in 2000. And in that same year, you remember what happened in Florida.
Yeah, still the election.
Was given the presidency, in Florida. And the son of Herbert W. Bush became president of the United States, George Bush. So each time, it was easy to mobilize the CIA apparatus to overthrow President Aristide. And so he lasted 3 years in his second mandate. and the coalition of white cousins, the Americans, the French, and the Canadians, worked in tandem to overthrow him and do away with the very legitimate case for reparations and restitution, and exile President Aristide in South Africa. First, they took him to the Central African Republic, and with the intervention of activists Danny Glover and others, he managed to reunite with his two little girls. And, you know, I have to give honor and respect to President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa, who stood up to the white supremacist gang and welcomed Brother Aristide, who spent his years in South Africa teaching and completing a degree in South Africa. But I think the most important lesson for him was the time he spent with veterans of the anti-apartheid movement while he was in South Africa, and was able to find a way back to Haiti in 2011 and reopen the university that he had started and that the Americans had turned into an army barrack while they were there. And since his return, has been able to make a significant contribution to the Haitian education apparatus, as he had promised that he was going to do while he was in South Africa in exile, and promising to return to Haiti. So,
wow.
Some people are disappointed. Some people say that, well, he should have returned and, you know, stayed on the political ground and waged battle and beat the, you know, white supremacists. I, for one, consider that the groundwork that Dr. Aristide and his wife, Mildred Aristide, and we don't speak enough about this beautiful woman. I mean,
that's true. Us black folk, and when I say black folk, man, we criminally do overlook our sisters, like the late Khalid Muhammad once said, you know, about we cannot talk about Nelson Mandela without talking about Winnie Mandela. And I remember he once said he can forgive those he can forgive those no good rotten bastards of South Africa, but he can't forgive Winnie Mandela, a true revolutionary. What more does a black woman have to do? So you're right. You're right.
No, but you know, Sister Mildred Aristide, a beautiful woman who really fought alongside her husband and managed to maintain their relevant presence and building, you know, a cadre of young revolutionaries in Haiti who are resisting the ongoing colonization of Haiti. And so, as we speak, there are white supremacist forces who are plotting in Ottawa and in the United States and Paris a return of so-called United Nations troops on the ground in Haiti, because what they've done, okay, and I've heard that from people that I've spoken to on Parliament Hill here in Ottawa, who said basically what they were trying to do with the coup in 2004 is to level the playing field, because they found that Aristide's party, Lavalas, dominated too much. And so they wanted to create so-called opposition to Lavalas that they could control. And you know, that's how white people think that they can go into other people's country and manufacture a new reality where they would have political parties that would go on in elections where it wouldn't be the Lavalas only that the people could identify with.
Did Amnesty International play a negative role by you know, like kind of like what they do with Chavez or Maduro, or what they do with President Assad, or what they did with Ukraine, in which now they're getting flack because they're talking about Zelensky's war atrocities? But did Amnesty International also recycle bullshit that our seed supporters were violent and all sorts of stuff like that to justify later the death squads that was.
Unfortunately, yes. And I can tell you that I used to support Amnesty International, and I had to write to them. And my wife used to be a member of Amnesty International, and we said to them, the hell with it. We're withdrawing our support. Because what they were doing basically was spewing out all of the white supremacist propaganda that was coming from the United States, while the UN troops that were used by the CIA to invade Haiti in 2004 were conducting genocide. Okay? The word is not too strong, okay? Because they essentially
genocide and politicide, basically like killing anyone which was an Aristide supporter.
Exactly. I mean, Kevin Pina's film "We Must Kill the Bandits," as far as I know, is the best work that documents essentially how they use the United Nations apparatus to cover a racist imperialist takeover of a black nation. It wasn't invented in Haiti. It wasn't the first time, okay? It's the United Nations troops that were used to take over the Congo and assassinate Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba in the 60s, 1960. Yeah. So it's not an invention. But what they've done in the modern times in Haiti is horrific. Because at the time, right, many of us in the so-called left were celebrating Lula da Silva of Brazil. And who was leading the UN troops in Haiti? Brazil. Lula's Brazil.
Yeah, actually, yeah, go ahead.
Lula betrayed Haiti, thinking that by playing cozy with the white imperialists, they were going to be nice to him. And they beat his ass nonetheless. And
yeah, it's funny. It's funny how they all fall for that. But but before I get to this brief question about the earthquake and Wycliffe, Jean, we're almost on the questions. Please, tell our audience what was your reaction when Lula later got overthrown in that legislative coup that saw Delma sacked and later him in jail. What was your reaction again? Because I mean, it was a great reaction because it's like, hey.
Listen, I really felt bad, okay, because I had the privilege to be in Brazil in 2014. I was in Rio, Sao Paulo. I was in Salvador, Dubai, and I know the people love Lula, and they love Dilma. Especially black Brazilians, seeing that this change in governance in Brazil brought a lot of positive change for the black people of Brazil. Unfortunately, Lula betrayed what he was supposed to be, with the idea that by playing nice to the Americans and, the French in the theater of Haiti, that they were going to be nice to him, or at least, not attack him for. And it didn't happen. They put him in jail.
Well, here,
Fortunately.
Here's hoping when when he does make his political comeback that he does that he stands up for Haiti and doesn't make that mistake again, but who knows. But then I have to ask this. So I have to ask this question. So respond briefly to this, which is the earthquake which devastated Haiti. You had so there was an earthquake that devastated Haiti. I believe Stephen Harper was still the prime minister. Barack Obama was the president. They hired Bill Clinton, George W. Bush to help out with that. And now you had Wycliffe. Now you had So I want your response to this. Wyclef Jean, who is a Haitian immigrant who later, part of the popular '90s rap group the Fugees, and later does terrible reggae music. Now, was Wyclef Jean, was he a left alternative to the different Duvalierist factions, or So talk about Wyclef Jean. Was he a left alternative? And talk about Sean Penn, the white savior, and your assessment of him and his I'm gonna save Haiti, and and stuff like that.
Sorry, Wyclef is an embarrassment. When you watch Wyclef playing Bob Marley music, and you realize that Wyclef has been mobilized, utilized by the CIA in Haiti to maintain the status quo, to ridicule the Haitian movement, revolution, it is sad. I would be so happy to say that, Wyclef is this very progressive Haitian rapper. I mean, the man is talented musically. But when you look how he was instrumentalized by the CIA to prop up the idea that the United States is going to help, Haiti by using the talent of Hollywood greats like Wyclef Jean, Sean Penn after the earthquake. All propaganda.
Wow. So Sean, so Sean Penn, and Sean Penn, Vanessa Beeley, one of the journalists, one of the journalists who exposed the white helmets for the frauds they were, as basically like a front for Gulf Western Israeli backed, death squads, Islamist Wahhabi death squads. She, in her investigation into Sean Penn's NGOs, basically said a version of, she basically exposed a version of what you just described to Wyclef Jean, that no, Sean Penn, like he works with with whichever part of the oligarchy deep state he can be of use to. In his case, helping out the Clintons, and we know the Clintons' track record, both crooked Hillary and slick Willie Bill when it comes to Haitian politics. So Sean Penn was also another one of those just like corrupt NGOs, gaslighters when it comes to Haitian affairs.
Yes. And in fact, after the earthquake, they mobilized both Wyclef and Sean Penn, and to make it interesting for people who live in Hollywood land, they create a little dynamic conflict between Sean Penn and Wyclef, and people get busy and lost in the whole thing, when in reality both Sean Penn and Wyclef have the same masters in Washington. Really, I mean, it got so ridiculous that I don't know, I mean, who makes those decisions in the CIA? Okay, because it seemed like they were applying the same remedy to their own country. And that's how you had, the Donald.
Or Barack Obama.
I don't know if they thought they were making a joke, but Donald Trump becomes president of the United States of America.
Well, and just like Bolsonaro, factions of like the 1%ers and the deep state are going, I think we're having buyer's remorse over this guy. Unbelievable.
So, they did the same thing to Haiti, right? Wycliffe Hollywood has landed in Haiti, in Haitian politics. And of course, they use Wycliffe to prop up Michel Martelly, basically a black version of Donald Trump in Haiti.
Wow.
And really, did you not, right? I mean, you know the famous sentence of Donald Trump, grab them by the...
Yeah.
Michel Martelly does it in public, on stage.
I think isn't he the one that you called like a crackhead when you were last on the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute?
Yeah, and it's not. I'm not making fun of him. He admitted the fact that when he was in the United States in Florida, he used to steal cement trucks where he was working for a cement company so that he could generate money to buy crack. That's what he was doing. So Bill and Hillary Clinton select this crackhead to become...
It's so darkly farcical, but my gosh.
Michel Martelly with Wyclef Jean, with the white Haitian gang, folks like Charles-Henri Baker on the same truck, claiming that they're working for Haitian democracy. And this is the regime called the Bald Head Haitian Party, PHTK, who've been running Haiti since 2010-11.
Briefly then, when Jacques Chirac died, he was hailed like Charles de Gaulle. He was hailed very much as, and Canadians will understand this reference, as a compassionate, progressive, conservative who bravely resisted going to war in Iraq. Very briefly, how do you explain his legacy, especially with respect to Haiti?
Chirac is a champion for the white supremacist. I mean, to have a Frenchman stating in 2000 that Haïti, à proprement parler, n'a jamais été une colonie française, which means, properly speaking, Haiti has never been a French colony. And what did you just say? Well, essentially, he was denying that France has anything to do with the impoverishment of the African people of Haiti. I mean, of course, if you go into technicalities, when the French were running the slave colony, they changed its name and called it Saint-Domingue. But Haiti was always Haiti. That's what the First Nations people called it. And yes, while the French had the folly that this land was theirs, they renamed it Saint-Domingue. But yeah, it's the same island. It's the same people. It was located in the same place in the Caribbean.
To Guadeloupe and all those French territories, demand your independence, please, and have some self-respect. Ooh, Jacques Chirac. Yeah, maybe not hell. He's definitely in purgatory, though. Yeah, go ahead.
In Guadeloupe and Martinique, whenever there's a movement towards independence or emancipation, they say, see what happened to the Haitians, how they became impoverished. Don't go there. And that's why we continue to invest a lot of money to keep Haiti impoverished.
You've already you've already answered the question on what Aristide's up to now, and I think the jury's still out on whether he'll try to do another political comeback. But I'll answer this question though before we get to this, which is I think it's so painfully obvious that what the people power movements, what the what we need to do, the anti-imperialist movement, Haitian solidarity movement, is step up our game, raise up our voices, and I think we have to also challenge the entrenched racism that people do have towards Haiti, because the way you were describing how Latin Americans and other people in the Black diaspora treat Haiti, it's almost as if they're kind of like like the Roma or the Sinti people. There's an acceptable form of racism towards Haiti, and I think that needs to be challenged. And if not, honestly, if not for the work of my friend Yves Engler, reading many of the articles he's written on Haiti, he really gives like humanity to the Haitian people, which if you consume NGOs or some of these pseudo left media outlets, you would still think, yeah, it's awful what happens in Haiti, but there's such a basket case. I mean, the Haitians are a basket case, the Africans are a basket case. So we
understand it.
So not only do we need to step up our efforts and just speaking out and speaking out against the NGOs and whatnot, but I think also people themselves need to challenge their own inner racism and decolonize their own minds when it comes to Haiti, right?
Yes, I mean, you cannot be lazy about it. And I cannot know what's happening in Bangladesh unless I take the time to sit down and listen to the people of Bangladesh. And it sounds so obvious. You wonder, why don't people do it? There are articulated Haitians who can tell you about their struggle in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in whatever language you want. Yes, in their native Haitian Creole as well. So, it's not like it's rocket science. The reason why a lot of people don't make the effort is that they're lazy and they are self-absorbed. I mean, European people have a tendency of thinking they know everything about the world.
Yeah,
I don't want.
In fact, I take the controversial position that there is no genocide happening in China with the Uyghurs. And when I keep hearing people, even when you say to them, guys, the stories are coming from the National Endowment of Democracy. It's coming from these groups which are backed by by the National Endowment of Democracy, the CIA, and then they look at you like, okay, I know that the powers to be have lied to us in the past, but this time they are right on on this, because it's China, like these annoying Western do-gooders.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I think it's not that complicated. It's not rocket science. Listen to the people tell their own stories. I mean, it doesn't matter how long you work at it to explain to people that they don't need to solve the natives from themselves. They don't need to tell the stories of the natives for them. No, the world is not complex, understood, explained only through white mouths, white eyes. We African progressives have taken the time to learn about Karl Marx. To me, it's obvious that the European so-called progressives need to study Dessalines. They need to study Malcolm X. It's simple. It's not complex.
Exactly. And that's why, sometimes, And you get this from even the best white Marxist when they're very condescending about, you guys need to learn about Leon Trotsky, you guys need to learn about Vladimir Lenin, and how dare you tear down statues of Abraham Lincoln and the founding fathers, and then you go, yeah, try to get Native Americans and Black people on your side when you approach them like that, but. Anywho, then very briefly before we get to the James Lipton question, there is when do you think America will ever get to the level Canada is at right now, or New Zealand is at right now, and to a very small extent Australia is when it comes to indigenous solidarity. Now, America and Australia both terrible when it comes to indigenous solidarity. America is slightly better in that they're not genocide denialists like the Australians are. But that being said, Black Lives Matter, Queer Lives Matter, Latinx Lives Matter, even anti-imperialism and Palestine justice, I think, is very great in the U.S. But when it comes to Native American solidarity, it's not like how it is in Canada, where Black Lives Matter and Native Lives Matter have merged into one, and we're all leftists. It's just part of their DNA that we have to settle. We have to show solidarity to Indigenous people and make a top priority to address their grievances. When do you think America will ever get to that level that Canada or New Zealand's at?
Honestly, I don't know, because I don't know that I'm all that happy or satisfied with what has happened so far in Canada.
Okay.
There's progress, but there's a whole lot left to do, a whole lot. And our organizing is definitely not to the level of what is required to make imperialism back up, back down, and stop doing what they're doing. So I don't think people in Canada, we need to start congratulating ourselves. And really, I reject this whole idea of, we're not like the Americans. Like, that's too cheap. That's too easy to say that, okay, we've done. We haven't done much. We have a whole lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah.
You just turn on the TV and you'll see that we have a whole lot of work cut out for us to do. The humanity that we are aspiring to create does not call for us to congratulate ourselves in Canada or any place. We just got to keep on doing it, whether it is in the United States, in New Zealand, in Australia. Just keep busy.
France, Europe, because Europe, they don't acknowledge that there's institutional racism going on, and they're in complete denial that their media is just as bad, if not shittier, than like American British media. So I think globally, all of whatever you want to call it, the left or people who want people power, they all have to really get their shit together. And enough of the myth of the mythology that my country's a force for good in the world, and it's only when it's this particular politician or that particular party that's in power that everything goes to. But anywho, we close the program. We usually end the program with the questionnaire done by Marcel Proust, and you probably were familiar with Bernard Pivot when he was popular in France. Used to do the questionnaire. And later James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio would do this. So, Jean, it's your turn it's your turn to do this, but so that before you enjoy the rest of the weekend, what is your favorite words?
My favorite words.
Yeah. Favorite word. It could be in any language.
Yeah. Ubuntu. Love.
Okay, perfect. Okay, what's your least favorite words?
International community. It means nothing.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Beautiful music, man.
What turns you off then?
Religion.
What's that? I'm gonna have to have you back on the program to talk about Black atheism and why Black people should embrace it more. then, I think I think you said what sound or noise you love? That's music. What sound and then what sound or noise do you hate?
Oh boy, noise that I hate. Heavy metal. Sorry.
Heavy metal music. So you like good Haitian Black music? That's the sound that you love, but the sound or noise you hate is heavy metal music. Okay, I'll remind myself. Never play metal when I'm when I'm near you. And then, what's your favorite curse word then?
Curse word.
And remember, it can be in any language.
I don't really. Favorite?
Favorite curse words.
Nah, I don't have appetite for cursing.
Okay, no problem. If you weren't doing what profession? If you weren't doing all the great activism you do, the radio shows, the books you do, the science you participate in. So if you weren't doing all of that and all of the activism you do, what would you love to do?
Progressive film production.
Okay, and what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Priest, like my father.
And if heaven exists, just if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Yeah, lots of music here. There's lots of music here. And my world has all of the music of all the peoples of the world.
Well, on that note, we were joined on this epic edition of 1+1 with Jean Saint-Vil, who is a Haitian-Canadian radio show host, historian, journalist, activist. Hey, guys, he also does science. Pan-Africanist, Pan-Latin Americanist thinker, and very much like me, wants all oppressed people to just unite and this ghastly system of global white supremacy and their voodoo economics. Jean, thank you so much for taking so much time on a Saturday night to come on 1+1. I look forward to having you back on in the future. You give my best to all the comrades, and if you see Miss L. Jones, if you see Eve and so forth, you give them my best. All right. So thank you so much.
So much, brother Youri, knowing that you were doing this at this crazy hour in the morning from Belgium. Hey, man, great.
Well, thank you very much, and looking forward to having you back on in the future.